The house with good bones. The first thing she noticed wasn't the house. It was the silence. Not the dead, suffocating silence of a city apartment at 3 in the morning, when your thoughts get too loud and the walls feel like they're leaning in. This silence was alive. It hummed softly with cicadas hidden somewhere in the olive trees. The wind whispered through dry leaves. Gravel crunched under her shoes with a sound that felt embarrassingly loud, as if the land itself was watching her arrive. She stood there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring through the windshield like she needed permission to step out. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to herself. 33 years old. Recently divorced. Emotionally exhausted. And standing in the middle of nowhere, wearing a city jacket and clean sneakers, about to renovate an old house she hadn't set foot in since she was a teenager. She opened the car door anyway. The heat wrapped around her instantly, thick, dry, unapologetic. Andalusian heat didn't ask how you were doing. It just existed, daring you to survive it. She stepped out and finally looked at the house. Whitewashed walls, cracked and peeling in places, revealing old stone beneath like skin that had lived too many summers. Bougainvillea climbed the front facade in wild fuchsia rebellion, refusing to be tamed. The wooden door sagged slightly on its hinges, its lock ancient enough to belong in a museum. The windows looked like they were in a private debate about whether to collapse or hold on one more year. She swallowed. "It's perfect," she said aloud, surprised that she meant it. The house had belonged to her grandmother, Carmen, who had died 6 months earlier and left her 3 things. The house, a fat orange cat with an expression of permanent judgment, and a letter that read, "When life takes the ground from under your feet, come here. This house has good bones. So do you?" She had cried so hard reading it that the ink blurred. Then she packed her car, drove 6 hours without stopping, fueled by gas station coffee and stubbornness, and ended up here. She grabbed her bag, slammed the car door, and took 3 confident steps toward the house. On the 4th step, her sneaker caught in a crack in the gravel. She stumbled, flailed, and barely caught herself, except her shoe didn't survive. The sole tore loose with a sound that felt deeply symbolic. She stared at it in her hand. "Of course," she sighed. "Of course this is how it starts." That's when she heard the laugh. "Oh, warm." Unapologetically amused. She froze. Slowly she turned her head. He was leaning against the wooden fence of the neighboring property, arms crossed, sunlight cutting across his bare torso like it belonged there. No shirt. No apology for it. Just skin tanned by real work, shoulders broad and relaxed. A towel slung casually over one shoulder like this was the most normal thing in the world. Her brain short-circuited before it reached his face. She blinked once. Then again. Still no shirt. "Need help?" he asked, nodding toward the broken shoe in her hand. His voice was calm, friendly, with the faintest trace of amusement, like he'd seen this kind of thing before and knew exactly how it usually went. "I've got it under control," she said quickly, straightening even though she was standing unevenly, one shoe on, one shoe off, dignity hanging by a thread. He smiled. Not smug. Not mocking. Just entertained. "Looks like the road won the first round," he said. "The road got lucky," she shot back, slipping off the other shoe and planting her bare feet on the gravel with defiance. "It won't happen again." His smile widened, not because she was wrong but because she was brave enough to pretend she wasn't. He hopped the fence with an athletic ease that felt unnecessary and unfair, landing lightly a few steps away. "You must be Carmen's granddaughter," he said. Her chest tightened at the name. "Yes," she replied. "I'm here to renovate the house." He nodded slowly, eyes scanning the cracked walls, the leaning windows, the door that had clearly given up on modern expectations. "She talked about you," he said. "A lot." That caught her off guard. "She did." "Every time something broke," he replied. "Which was often. Sometimes I think she broke things on purpose just to have an excuse to feed me." Her throat burned. That was exactly something her grandmother would do. "I'm Marco," he added, extending a hand. "I handle maintenance around here." His palm was warm. Rough. Real. When she placed her hand in his, she felt suddenly, acutely aware of how small hers was in comparison. "Valeria," she said. The handshake lingered half a second longer than necessary. Not awkward. Not forced. Just noticed. "So," Marco said, stepping back, professionalism settling over him like a second skin. "I'll come by tomorrow morning and take a look. Fair warning, this place doesn't need a renovation. It needs patience. It needs love," she replied. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe respect. "Same thing," he said. That night, Lying in her grandmother's bed that smelled faintly of lavender and old memories, Valeria stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about a man with no shirt, kind eyes, and hands that looked like they knew how to fix things. She failed. Morning came early. She woke before sunrise, irritated with herself for caring enough to wake early at all. She dressed for work: jeans, a simple t-shirt, sneakers she hoped wouldn't betray her again. She added mascara for no reason she cared to admit. When Marco knocked at 8 sharp, she jumped anyway. He arrived this time wearing a shirt, plain, gray, slightly worn, and somehow that made things worse. He carried a toolbox in one hand and a notebook in the other. After walking through the house, testing pipes, knocking on walls, inspecting wiring, and frowning at things that clearly offended him on a personal level, he finally looked at her. "The foundation's solid," he said. "That's the important part. Everything else can be fixed." She thought of the letter. Good bones. "How long?" she asked. "A month. Maybe more." She nodded. "I want to help." His eyebrow lifted slightly as his eyes assessed her. Not dismissive, just honest. "Ever used a hammer?" "I hung a picture once. And? It fell." He laughed, full and genuine. "All right," he said. "You can help. But you do exactly what I say. No improvising." She saluted. The first accident happened before lunch. The second involved water, shouting, and a vocabulary in 2 languages she suspected wasn't suitable for polite company. The third was quieter. She slipped. He caught her. His arms wrapped around her instinctively, pulling her close, steady, protective. For a second, just one, neither of them moved. Her hands pressed against his chest. His heart was racing. "So," he said softly, clearing his throat as he stepped back, "we might need safety rules." She laughed, breathless. "Probably." As the sun set that evening, Valeria sat on the porch with her grandmother's cat, judging her life choices, watching Marco load his tools into his van. The house was still broken. Her life still uncertain. But for the first time in months, something inside her felt steady. She didn't know yet that the man everyone in town saw as just a handyman was hiding a truth that would soon turn every assumption upside down. And she definitely didn't know that renovating this house was going to cost her far more than time and money. It was going to cost her heart. Everyone is watching. Valeria discovered something by the 3rd morning in the village that no one had warned her about. Privacy did not exist. Not as a concept. Not as a courtesy. Not even as a polite illusion. The first sign was the knock at 9 a.m. She was standing in the kitchen, barefoot again, coffee mug in hand, watching Marco through the open window as he unloaded materials from his van. The steady rhythm of his movements had become oddly comforting. Lift, step, place, repeat, like watching someone who knew exactly where they belonged. The knock came again, firm and expectant. When she opened the door, she was met by a woman in her 60s with perfectly set hair, a floral apron that looked permanent, and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Valeria, right?" the woman said, already stepping inside. "I'm Remedios. I lived 3 houses down from your grandmother." She thrust a plate of croquettes into Valeria's hands before she could respond. "Your abuela and I were practically sisters," Remedios continued. "Well, sisters who argued about recipes every summer, but sisters nonetheless." "That sounds like her," Valeria said politely. Remedios nodded, her eyes drifting, not subtly, toward the window. "I see Marco is here early," she added. Valeria felt the sentence settle between them like bait. "Yes," she replied. "He's helping with the renovation." "Of course he is," Remedios said, smiling wider. "Such a hard-working boy. Always has been." Boy. Marco was at least in his late 30s, but the way people spoke about him made him sound perpetually junior, useful, reliable, never quite central. Remedios leaned closer. "And very uncomplicated," she added meaningfully. Valeria blinked. "Uncomplicated?" "You know," Remedios said, lowering her voice, "simple life. Works with his hands. No big ambitions. But good for what he does." She patted Valeria's arm as if offering condolences. "Well, enjoy the croquettes. If you need anything at all, the whole village is here." The whole village, Valeria realized, had already decided who she was. And who Marco was. By noon, 2 more neighbors had appeared, one with bread, another with unsolicited advice about contractors. By evening, she knew for certain that people were watching her more closely than the peeling walls of the house. They watched how she dressed. They watched how long Marco stayed. They watched the way he looked at her when he thought no one noticed. Which was ironic. Because everyone noticed. Marco, for his part, seemed unfazed. He worked steadily, spoke kindly, treated every interruption with respectful patience. When Valeria asked him if the constant visits bothered him, he shrugged. "That's just how it is here," he said. "People talk. Then they talk about the talking. And that doesn't annoy you?" He smiled faintly. No point fighting the weather. She didn't understand then how much that sentence revealed about him. Friday night arrived wrapped in music. Remedios returned, this time not asking but informing. "There's a festival in the square," she said. "You're coming?" It wasn't a question. An hour later, Valeria stood in front of the mirror wearing a red dress she hadn't planned on wearing. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't revealing. But it made her feel like herself again, which was somehow more dangerous. The square was transformed, string lights, folding tables, music drifting through warm air thick with laughter and wine. She spotted Marco immediately. He stood near the bar, sleeves rolled up, talking to a group of men who laughed loudly at something he said. When he turned and saw her, his smile stalled mid-motion. For just a second, the world narrowed. He crossed the square toward her. "You look," he started then stopped. "Wow." She laughed. "That bad?" "No," he said quietly. "That dangerous." They sat together. Drank. Laughed. For the first time in years, Valeria felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel since the divorce. Then someone pulled a chair up beside them without asking. Alvaro Mendoza. He wore a linen blazer and confidence like armor. The kind of man who had never doubted that the world would make space for him. "Valeria," he said brightly. "I heard you were here. Thought I'd say hello." He didn't acknowledge Marco at first. Not directly. Just enough to make it clear who he thought mattered. "So," Alvaro continued, "you moved back to fix up the old place?" Bold choice. Marco shifted slightly, posture tightening. "It's her house," he said calmly. "She's doing something meaningful with it." Alvaro finally looked at him. "Oh, you must be the contractor." The word landed wrong. Marco didn't correct him. "Yes," he said simply. Alvaro smiled, one of those smiles that assumed hierarchy without discussion. "Well," he said, turning back to Valeria, "if you need real professionals, my father knows people. Big firms. Serious renovations." Valeria felt heat rise in her chest. Marco said nothing. But when Alvaro asked her to dance, Marco stood. "She already has a partner," he said, extending his hand. Valeria took it. The dance was slow. Close. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "I know," Marco replied. "I wanted to." Later, as they walked back to the house under a quiet sky, Valeria felt something shift, not just between them but inside her. She realized something uncomfortable. Everyone else saw Marco as less. And part of her, if she was honest, hadn't questioned it at first. That thought haunted her long after she fell asleep. The truth arrived days later, quietly. In the grocery store. She was choosing tomatoes when she overheard two men talking near the counter. "Did you hear Reese landed that restoration contract?" one said. "The hotel one?" the other replied. "That's huge money." "Huge?" "He's already loaded. His company cleared millions last year." Valeria froze. "Still shows up in town fixing things himself," the first man added. "Says if he stops working with his hands, he forgets who he is." Valeria's grip tightened on the tomatoes. That night, she confronted Marco. "How many employees do you have?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. 32, he said finally. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. She stared at him. "You let everyone think you were just local help?" He nodded. "And you?" he asked softly. "What did you think?" The question hurt because it mattered. "I didn't know," she said. "But I should have asked." Marco smiled gently. "Most people don't." He explained everything, how he started with nothing, how her grandmother had trusted him when no one else would, how success never changed the way he measured himself. "I fix things," he said. "That's all I ever wanted to be good at." Valeria felt something crack open. Not disappointment. Respect. Outside, the house stood quietly, stronger every day. Inside, something far more fragile was being rebuilt. But neither of them realized yet that the village hadn't finished judging. And when the truth came out publicly, it wouldn't be gentle. The day respect was tested. The village changed the moment it believed it knew the truth. Not the real truth, just the version that fit comfortably inside old habits and unchallenged assumptions. By Monday morning, everyone knew that Valeria and Marco were together. They didn't know how. They didn't know why. But they knew enough to talk. The smiles became thinner. The greetings shorter. The curiosity sharper, less friendly, more evaluative. Valeria noticed it first at the bakery. She stepped inside to buy bread, only to feel the sudden quiet that fell when conversations paused half a second too late to pretend nothing had changed. Paquita, the baker, handed her the loaf without meeting her eyes. "You settling in okay?" she asked, tone neutral. "Yes," Valeria replied, matching it. Paquita hesitated, then said what she clearly hadn't planned to say out loud. "Just, be careful, dear." "Careful of what?" Paquita glanced around, lowered her voice. "You're from Madrid. You have options. Don't tie yourself down to something temporary." Valeria understood exactly what she meant. She smiled politely, thanked her and left, but the words followed her all the way back to the house. Temporary. As if Marco were a phase, a project, a distraction. That afternoon, Marco arrived quieter than usual. He worked longer without breaks, movements efficient, expression closed. When Valeria finally asked if something was wrong, he waved it off. "Just tired," he said. She knew better. The tension reached its peak 2 days later. A luxury SUV rolled into the village square like it didn't belong, and didn't care. Alvaro Mendoza stepped out wearing tailored confidence and sunglasses that reflected everything except humility. He walked straight into the square cafe where half the village happened to be gathered. "Big announcement," he said loudly, clapping once. "My family's investing in a new boutique hotel project nearby." Murmurs rose immediately. "That old olive mill," Alvaro continued. "We're turning it into something special." Someone asked who was handling the renovation. Alvaro smiled. "A serious company. Professionals." Then his eyes landed on Marco, who had just arrived with Valeria. "Oh," Alvaro added casually, "no offense." Marco didn't respond. Valeria felt something tighten in her chest. "You should come see the plans," Alvaro said to her directly. "You might enjoy watching a real renovation." The insult was subtle, which made it worse. Valeria opened her mouth to respond, but Marco spoke first. "She doesn't need an invitation," he said calmly. "She already knows what quality looks like." Alvaro laughed lightly. "Relax. I didn't mean anything by it." That was the problem. He didn't think he needed to. Later that night, Valeria found Marco sitting alone on the porch, staring at the house. "They don't respect you," she said quietly. He shrugged. "They don't need to. But they judge you. They judge what they think they see. And that doesn't bother you?" Marco looked at her, then really looked. "It used to," he admitted. "A long time ago." She sat beside him, anger simmering under her skin. "I don't want to be part of that," she said. "I don't want to stay quiet." "You don't have to fight my battles," he replied gently. "I'm not," she said. "I'm fighting my own." The moment came sooner than expected. Saturday afternoon. The village gathered at the old olive mill for Alvaro's public unveiling. Plans displayed, wine poured, voices loud with admiration. Valeria and Marco arrived together. The looks were immediate. The whispers not even subtle. Alvaro welcomed everyone with practiced charm, walking them through renderings of polished stone, glass walls, luxury branding. "And of course," Alvaro said loudly, "this level of work requires a company with real experience." His eyes flicked toward Marco. "This isn't a job for patchwork repairs." A few people laughed. Not maliciously. Comfortably. That was worse. Marco stayed silent. Valeria didn't. She stepped forward. "Do you know who you're talking to?" she asked. Alvaro smiled indulgently. "I know exactly who I'm talking to." "No," she said evenly. "You know what you assume." The room stilled. Alvaro shrugged. "Assumptions exist for a reason." That was when a man stepped out of the crowd. Older. Well-dressed. Confident without arrogance. "Marco," he said. Marco turned. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Nor you," Marco replied. The man looked at Alvaro. "I'm with the Regional Heritage Board," he said. "We're approving contractors." He turned back to Marco. "You still overseeing your projects personally?" Marco nodded. "Always." The man smiled. "Good. Then we'll proceed with your company." Silence fell like a dropped glass. Alvaro stared. "What?" The man raised an eyebrow. "Your firm didn't meet the preservation standards." Marco's did. "He restored the Antequera Palace. And the Cordoba Monastery." Gasp. Whispers. Shock rippled through the crowd. Alvaro's face drained of color. Valeria felt the moment land. Art. Marco hadn't changed. Only the story around him had. When the mask fell. Silence has a sound when it's heavy enough. It pressed down on the old olive mill courtyard like heat before a storm, thick and inescapable. No one moved. No one laughed. Even the string of confident assumptions that had carried the village for weeks seemed to evaporate midair. Marco stood exactly where he had been before, hands relaxed at his sides, posture steady, expression unreadable. Nothing about him had changed, but everything around him had. Alvaro was the first to recover his voice, though it came out thinner than before. "There must be some misunderstanding," he said quickly. "My father's company has handled dozens of projects. The man from the Heritage Board didn't even look at him. "This isn't personal," he said calmly. "It's about credentials, experience, proven results." He turned back to Marco. "You didn't mention you were already working locally." Marco shrugged. "I didn't think it mattered." That sentence landed harder than anything else that day, because it exposed the lie everyone had told themselves, that importance always announced itself, that power demanded attention, that value wore a uniform people recognized. Murmurs spread through the crowd. "Did you hear what he restored? The palace? That monastery was falling apart before. Wait, his company did that?" Valeria stood beside Marco, heart pounding, watching faces rearrange themselves in real time. Surprise. Embarrassment. Respect. New, awkward, unsure. Alvaro looked like someone had kicked the air out of him. "You never said," he started. Marco met his gaze, calm and unwavering. "You never asked." The Heritage official closed his folder. "We'll be in touch next week," he said to Marco. "The mill deserves careful hands." When he walked away, the courtyard erupted, not in applause but in confusion. People suddenly wanted to talk to Marco. Men who had barely nodded at him before now shook his hand. Women who had dismissed him as simple, smiled too brightly. The same voices that once pitted Valeria now praised her choices. She hated that part the most. Later, as the crowd thinned, Valeria and Marco walked back toward the house in silence. Not the comfortable silence of before. A heavier one. "They'll treat you differently now," Valeria said quietly. Marco nodded. "They already are. Does that feel good?" He considered the question longer than she expected. "No," he said finally. "It feels late." They reached the porch. The house glowed softly in the evening light. Walls smoother, windows steady, foundations unchanged but revealed. Valeria turned to him. "You let them think you were less." "I let them think what they wanted," he replied. "People reveal themselves that way." "And what about me?" she asked. His eyes softened. "You asked. That mattered." She swallowed. "I should have defended you sooner." Marco shook his head. "You defended me when it counted. And you didn't do it to prove anything. You did it because it was wrong." That night the village buzzed. By morning the story had grown. Marco wasn't just a contractor anymore, he was the contractor. The one who chose to work quietly. The one who didn't brag. The one who fixed Carmen's house with his own hands. The respect was sudden. Too sudden. Valeria watched it with unease. Because she understood something the others didn't. This wasn't a victory parade. It was a reckoning. Alvaro didn't show up for days. When he finally did, it was at the house. He stood stiffly on the porch, sunglasses off, ego stripped bare. "I owe you an apology," he said to Marco. Marco waited. "I judged you," Alvaro continued. "I assumed." "Yes," Marco said. "You did." The apology stopped there. It wasn't complete, but it was honest enough. Valeria watched the exchange and felt something settle inside her. Justice hadn't come in the form of revenge or humiliation. It came in exposure. The house renovation neared completion. Fresh paint. Solid beams. Quiet pipes. And yet Valeria felt restless. That evening she found Marco in the kitchen, studying the finished walls. "When this is done," she asked, "what happens next?" Marco looked at her, really looked at her. "That depends," he said. "On what you want." The question frightened her more than the village ever had. Because the house was almost ready. And so was the truth she could no longer avoid. What remains when the noise fades? The house was finished on a Thursday morning. Not with fanfare. Not with applause. Just quiet. Sunlight poured through windows that no longer rattled. Floors no longer creaked in complaint. Pipes stayed silent, obedient. The walls held warmth instead of dampness, strength instead of apology. Valeria stood in the doorway, barefoot, coffee cooling in her hands, and felt something unfamiliar. Marco wiped his hands on a cloth and stepped back, surveying the work with the expression of someone who wasn't looking for praise, only truth. "She's solid," he said. "She'll outlast both of us." Valeria smiled softly. That's what my grandmother said about people. He nodded. Smart woman. The village came by that afternoon. Not officially. Not all at once. One by one. Some brought food. Some brought compliments that came too late to feel sincere. Some just wanted to stand in the doorway and say, "It's beautiful," as if beauty had always been their concern. Valeria thanked them politely. But she watched. She watched how respect shifted once status was confirmed. How kindness appeared once power was acknowledged. How people softened only after learning who Marco really was. And she learned something important. Justice doesn't always feel satisfying in the moment. Sometimes it feels clarifying. That evening Marco didn't stay late. For the first time since the renovation began, he packed his tools slowly. Deliberately. When he finished, he didn't put the toolbox back in the van. He set it down by the door. "I won't be coming tomorrow," he said. Valeria's chest tightened. "Oh. The house doesn't need me anymore." Silence followed. Not awkward. Final. She nodded. "I understand." He hesitated, then said quietly, "That's not what I meant." She turned. "What did you mean?" Marco met her eyes, not as a contractor, not as the man everyone now respected, but as himself. "The house is done," he said. "But I didn't come here just to fix walls." Her heart started racing. "I stayed," he continued, "because of a promise. Then because of work. Then because of you." The words hung between them. "And now," she asked. "Now I need to know if I'm leaving as a worker, or as something else." Valeria inhaled deeply. This was the moment she'd been avoiding. Not because she didn't want him, but because wanting him meant choosing something real. "I spent years being married to someone who looked impressive," she said slowly. "Someone everyone approved of. And I was lonely every day." Marco didn't interrupt. "I don't want a life that makes sense to other people anymore," she continued. "I want one that feels honest." She stepped closer. "And you're the most honest thing that's happened to me in years." Marco exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. "So," he said, voice steady but eyes bright, "does that mean?" "It means," she interrupted, smiling, "that if you leave today, it won't be because the work is done." He reached for her hand. This time there was no hesitation. They didn't kiss dramatically. They didn't need to. They stood there, hands joined, future uncertain but chosen. The next week, Valeria attended the official approval meeting for the olive mill project. She sat in the back, unnoticed. Watched Alvaro struggle through explanations without arrogance to protect him. Watched Marco speak only when necessary. Watched the room lean toward him without him asking. Power, she realized, didn't announce itself. It endured. Later, outside, Alvaro approached her. "You were right," he said quietly. She waited. "I judged him. And I judged you." "Yes," she replied calmly. "I won't do that again." She nodded, not forgiving, not punishing. Just acknowledging. That was his work now. Not hers. Months passed. The house filled with life again. Valeria stayed longer than planned. Then longer still. She rode in the mornings. Walked in the evenings. Learned the rhythm of the land. Marco split his time between projects in the village, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to. People treated him differently now. He didn't. One evening, Valeria found the old letter from her grandmother tucked inside a drawer. She read it again, smiling. "This house has good bones. So do you?" She looked around. At the walls. At the quiet strength. At the man fixing a chair leg without being asked. She understood now. The house had never been the point. It was the test. The mirror. The place where truth showed itself. About class, about judgment, about love. She stepped outside and wrapped her arms around Marco from behind. "You know," she said, "everyone thinks I moved here to renovate a house." He smiled. "And?" "They have no idea," she whispered, "that I was really here to rebuild myself." He turned, kissed her forehead gently, and said the simplest truth of all. "Then I'm glad you stayed."